Hello guys, welcome to another episode of our Python for Artificial Intelligence playlist, where we look at some of the concepts needed to some of the Python concepts needed to be able to learn AI. So in this episode we'll be looking at list. Where we have our VS Code, where we write code, open in the right folder, and we have created this list folder, this list file, list.py, and our command prompt where we'll be running and testing our code is also already open. So list, so a list is a collection of items, stored in square brackets and separated by commas. So the first thing we'll be looking at is creating a list. So let's say, so a list is a collection of items stored in square brackets. So like creating a list in Python is as easy as declaring a variable that will hold a list. For example, let's say empty list. That's already a list. It is empty, but it is a list. So that's creating a list in Python. So again, we could have another list, say let's say John, Jack, and let's say G. So this is a list of these names. We call them names. So we'll look at some of the built-in functions or things we can do with lists. So the first thing we are going to look at, as far as lists are concerned, we are going to look at accessing items in a list. So let's just say accessing items in a list. So for example, there might be a situation in an application when we're working, where we want to maybe pick the first item in a list, or an item at a particular index. So to pick items in a list, let's use our print. So what print does is it prints stuff, whatever I want to print to the console. So we have been using it. So print works just like this. So you just print and then you pass whatever I want to print. So we're using print to display different things, just so we can run our code and see it on the command prompt here. So accessing items in a list. So we have this list of names. We might want to access the first item. So to access items in a list, all you have to do is names and square bracket, and then in the square bracket you pass the index of the item you want to pick. The index of the items you want to pick in the square bracket on the names, on the list variable. So for this case, we might want to pick the first item. Remember, in programming we start counting at 0. So the first item is at index 0, the second item is at index 1, the third item is at index 2. So we might want to pick the first item, which is at index 0. All you have to do is pass a 0 in the square bracket, and if you run our code, we get John. Okay, we get John. So John is the first item. You wanted to pick the let's say the last item, which is J. We know it's at index 2. So if we run this, we get J. So that's accessing items in a list. So the next thing we are going to look at, as far as lists are concerned, is we'll look at, sometimes it's important knowing the length of a list, because most of the time lists contain like data, maybe in a large amount of data, and there might be a situation we need to know the length, or for some reason we need to know the length. So let's just say length. So getting the length of a list, then we'll use print. So like to get the length of a list, all we have to do is we use the len function. That's len. And what the len function does is it takes as parameter the list that we want to calculate the length of. So in this case, we want to get the length of the names list. We pass names in the len function like so, and if you run it, it gives us, under J, it gives us 3, which is the number of items you have in this list, in our names list. So if you had maybe, I know you can have different type of items, because like the list initially are just John, Jack, J, which are all strings. But no, you can have numbers like 45. You can even have booleans. It still works. That's a list. So if we still run the code, we should now get 5 because we have five items in our list. So that's it. So that's getting the length of a list. So the next thing we are going to be looking at in this is we are going to look at adding items in a list. So to add items in a list, let's just do adding items in list. So the first method we are going to look at is the append method. So what append does is it adds as a function. It's a built-in function that we call on list, and what it takes a parameter which is the item we want to add into our list. So for example, we might want to add another item into our list of names. So what we can do is let's leave this first of all as 3 items, and then we print. Let's comment this out. So we print names first of all. So we print name, then print names, then let's say we want to add another name into our names list. So you can say names dot append, and we pass the name we want to add. We already have John, Jack, J. We can say we want to add Mark. After adding Mark, if you should print names again, you see that we have an extra name added to the list. So the first list we have John, Jack, J. Now under we have John, Jack, J, Mark. That's the append method has added an extra name to our list. So that's append method. That's the append method of adding an item into a list. Now there might be a situation where you want to, let's comment this out again. There might be a situation where you want to, because with append we add we add an item at the end of a list, but there might be a situation you want to add an item at a particular index, at a particular position. So there is the insert method which works on list. So you might say names dot insert, and the insert method is slightly different from the append method in that you can add at a particular position. So it takes 2 parameters: the position where we want to add an item at. So in this case we could decide we want to add an item at the second index. We know at the moment the second index, which is index 1, has the name Jack. So let's say we know to access names. So we know the, let's say 1, we know the name at index 1. This is index 0, this index 1. We know the name at index 1 is Jack. But now let's say we want to insert another name, a different name at index 1, which will mean Jack will move 1 index behind. You could say, okay, insert at index 1, which is the first parameter, which takes the position where we want to insert at, and then the particular name we want to insert. Let's say we want to insert Jake. No, let's use another name that is not, let's say May. So if we do this and then we print our names list again, you see that we have, like, the structure changes. So now we know, like at index 1 we initially had the name, we initially had Jack at index 1, just like you see here printed. But after doing insert at index 1, we now have John, but after John we no longer have Jack, we have May before Jack. So what happens is the insert function is different from the append function in that you can insert at a particular index, at a particular position, and whatsoever the item that was at that position gets pushed to the next position. So now we have May that enters at the second position, and then Jack moves 1 index behind. So that's the insert method. So they are both useful for adding items in a list. one adding at the end, the other adding wherever we want to add. So the next built-in function we are going to be looking at is we are going to look at reverse. So let's just say reverse. So just like the name says, the way reverse works, it changes the order of it switches the order of a list. So it takes the first becomes the last, while the last becomes the first. So it turns the order completely. So we know our list here has John, Jack and Jay, with John being the first item. We know along the line we have added May, and we even added Mark. But the important thing is to know that John is the first, and since for Mark we used append, we know Mark should be the last name. So to reverse a list, all you have to do is, for example, we can say names, which is our list dot reverse. And now if we should try to print our names again, so we see first of all up is the initial print, the one up is the initial print, which is coming from line 20. You see here. Now after doing reverse on line 23, on line 24 we now get list being printed with Mark being the first. So initially Mark was the last and John was the first. Now after doing a reverse, Mark becomes the first while John becomes the last. So that's just how reverse works. So after reverse, the next built-in function we are going to look at is remove. So just like the name says, remove is removing an item from a list. So you could say want to remove let's say want to remove Mark from this list. All we have to do is names dot remove, and we pass the way the remove function works is it takes a parameter which is the name of the which is the item we want to remove. Yeah, so in this case we want to remove Mark. It takes just one parameter, so we want to remove Mark. Now if we say after doing a remove on line 27, if we should try to print our names list again, we should see that we are one item less. So now we see here the third one, the first two are the list and the reverse order of it, then the third one being the list after Mark is removed. So again we can see we can do two removes, but anyway I'm sure you get the idea. So that's Mark, and you remember, if you look at this, Mark was at no, I think let's do it for a name that is at a different index. So let's say let's remove May. This is because I'm going to explain another built-in function, and I would like to remove an item at any not the last index. So if we remove May and we print, you see that we have Mark, J, Jack, John. Now May, which was for the normal list, was at index 0, 1, 2, 3, index 3, or for the the normal list was at index 1, for the reverse list was at index 3. So we have removed May. Remove is one of the methods. The other method we can use to remove items in a list is pop. And pop, the way pop works is it removes the last item. Just like we saw for insert, we could insert at a particular position, at a particular index, and then we saw that append was adding just from the back, adding at the last position. Now we have also seen that remove can remove any item we want to remove. But if we want to remove from the back, like the last item, what we use is pop. So we say names dot pop. In this case we don't need to specify anything because the last item is there and it can be removed. So if we say names dot pop and we do print, and we name and we try to print our list again, our names list, we see that it becomes shorter again. From you look at 1, 2, 3, this third one had John at the end, but after doing a pop we no longer have John, we now have Jack being the last item in our list. So that's pop. So these two methods can be used to remove items in a list. So the next one we are going to look at slicing a list. There might be a situation in an app where you need to slice a list. Maybe you need to, for some reason, you need to slice a list. You need to get some items. So maybe the first 3 items, the first 2, the first all of that. So let's comment this out. So we have a list that at least has a so to slice a list, so let's just say we slice. So to slice a list, the way this method works is we let's say we wanted to, the way the method works, it cuts part of a list and returns it to you. So for example, we had another we know in this list, let's say we wanted to get the first two names, so we can, let's say we can create another variable and say call it first two, and to slice our initial list, which is a list of names, to get just the first two names, you can say list, sorry, our list is names, and we know the first two items are, it starts at 0, that means the first item, which is inclusive. And then to slice, we pass the first item. We saw something similar to this when we're looking at strings, and then we pass the up to the n. And now what you should know is that the n is exclusive, that means the last item should not be included. So for example, we wanted to slice the first two elements. We know the first two elements are 0, in the element at index 0 and the element at index 1, but we need to pass 2 here instead, because 2 is exclusive. That means 2 is where it ends but without including 2, while the starting is where it starts but including the start, that means 0. So if we should do slice the first two elements and we try to print our first two variable, we will see that we get the first two items of our list. So we get mark j, which are the first two items of our list. So when we do this, we slice. So we see here our list has 5 items, but after slicing and storing in another variable we call first two, when we try to print first two, we get mark and j, which are the first two names. So that's the slice method. So there are so many methods. We're not going to look at all of them. So another method we can look at is sort. So the way sort works is it sorts items in a list in ascending order. So we could decide we want to sort the sort can be for numbers, can be for strings. So we could decide we want to sort our list. So in this case, let's say names dot sort. We call sort on names, and if we print names again, so we see initially from line, let's say we get the last complete list we had this, where you see the mouse pointer, we had Mark, J, Jack, May, John, but after doing sort we get Jack. We know if alphabetically, we are taking J A, C comes before the next letter that comes after J A, which for this case, which for here is Y. So it, I'm sure you understand what I mean. It sorts in ascending order for strings as well as numbers. If our list had numbers instead, you see this better. So now we get Jack, J, John, Mark, May. So if we had a list that had numbers instead, just for the sake of making this understandable, let's say we had another list, let's say numbers, and we had 1, 10, 3, 4. So say we had this, and we sort it nums dot sort, and we try to print nums. You should see that we see the order here with 1, 10 coming after 1, but if we after doing a sort, we get it being in the right order: 0, 1, 2, 4, 9, 10, 57. So it sorts them in ascending order. Now this sort method takes 2 other optional parameters. So you can say reverse and you say true, that means it will reverse in descending. In this case, it will now reverse in descending order. So in this case, it will now reverse in descending order. So if we try printing nums, see it's now coming from 57 being the first item, and then 10. So it has been like sorted in descending order. So that's the sort method. So after the sort method, the next built-in function we are going to be looking at is max. So what max does is it returns the biggest number in a list. So let's just use print. We could say max, and we pass in our list nums. So in this case, you return to us the largest number in this list. So we know that the largest number in our list is 57, and we get 57 down here. So, and after max, mean is the other one. So if we were to do print mean nums, should give us the smallest item, which is 0. So we get 0. So that's max. That's max and mean. So the next function we are going to be looking at is another very important function. We'll look at filter. So the way the filter function works is it like you might have a list and you want to filter out items that don't meet a certain condition, a particular condition in that list. You might want to filter out items that don't meet a particular condition. So what the filter function does is it checks for items that like are either true or false for a particular condition. So let's just write the code, and you'll be easier to explain from there. So we already have a list. Of let's say we use our list of names. So let's say we wanted to filter out the names from this list that we know from our console. We have a list that has names that we have some names starting with J, some starting with M. So for example, wanted to get the names that start with M. So wanted to get the names that start with M, we can use the filter method. So what we'll do is, so like the filter, like first of all, this is how you write it. So you write it like so, filter, and then it takes two parameters. One parameter being a function, like the function that will run through the items in the list and check, and then the second parameter is the list where that the function will be going through each item of. So in this case, so to be able to use the filter method, we first of all need to define the function. I know we have not looked at function, but it's something we'll look down the line. So for example, like defining a function in Python is as easy as doing something like this. So let's say we want to have a function that checks for items that, like in this case, let's say we want to filter items names that start with letter J. So let's just call our function filter J names. So this is what we do. So that's, I mean, this is how it's done in Python. So we know what our list is supposed to do, sorry, I'm forgetting something. We know our function first of all needs to get called, and they will have to take each item of our list. So let's say in this case, let's just say we'll take each name. So our function filter J names will take as parameter a name and check that name for certain conditions. So in this case, we know our function will take name, and then what it will do is we are going to look at this like functions as well as conditions, like doing if statements and things like that. So in this case, we want to check for names. We want to we want to check for the names that start with letter, let's say we want to have a list that the names that start with letter M. So we know to get the first letter of a or to get the first letter of a string. We already saw this with strings. All you have to do is just like with arrays, you add square brackets to the name at the end, and then you pass the index. We know for the case of the first item we pass 0. So in this case, that means what will happen is inside we'll have our function filter j names that will take each name from our names list. We know our names list is up here, like it has more names. That's the initial form of it, but it has more names. If you look here, we see like it has 5 names. So it will take each name, each name represented here as a parameter, and it will check for a particular condition with that name. That means in this case we want to check if the name starts with letter M. Now there are more things we could do, like checking whether it's capital M or small m, but we'll keep it simple first of all. So in that case we could maybe need to call the lower function to maybe make sure all the names are small letter before checking or things like that, but we'll first of all just keep it simple. So in this case, filter j names, we want to check if the first letter of a name is capital M. So we say if name square bracket 0, which would return to us the first item of the name, is equal to M, like so, return true, else return false. So that's our function. So this is our function, and we already have our names list up. So now we'll create a variable that will hold the filtered out the filtered names. So let's call out M names, that is names that start with letter M, equals to filter. And now in our filter, like I said, it takes 2 parameters, the function that will run through each item of our list and the list itself. So in this case we pass our filter j names like so, and our after doing this like to test to see our new list of our new filtered list with names, with having like these M names, having just names starting with M, what we can do is we can say, like, again, we are going to look at that. We'll be using another concept that we have not touched. We are going to see down the line. So there are things we call loops, for loops, that are ways by which we can go through each item in a list. That means go through, like we have mentioned the fact that to filter we have to have the filter method takes a function that runs through each item in a list and checks for a particular condition. Again, now to print our list, we are going to use a for loop, which are ways by which we can loop through, like go through all the items in a list, or not just a list, in an iterable, like something that has a list of items and that can be run through. We are going to see that, like, not only lists are iterable. So to see our new list, like, to see the filtered names, that is the names that start with M, which we have filtered out from our names list, what we need to do is, so we'll use a for loop. So in this case, that's for in loop. We'll just do, let's say, for name in M names, print name. Mind you, name here is just within here. This other name here, like, these are two different, don't get confused. Or maybe let me just use another thing. So let's just say nm, so you don't get confused for now. So if we should now run our code, we see we get map and then we get May printed, which are names starting with capital, which are the names that start with M from our list. So if we were to print, if we wanted to instead filter out the names that start with J, all we have to do is put J here, and now if we should run it again, we instead get Jack, J, John. So that's the filter method. So it's a very like it's important, because many times you want to get things that meet a particular condition, you can always use the filter method. So what it does is it takes a function that will run through each item of a list and return items that meet a certain condition. That means that are true for a certain condition, and then like and not touch, like ones that don't meet that condition, that means are false, don't get returned. So that's the filter method. So the next method, or the next built-in function we are going to look at is map. So the way the map function works is slightly similar to the filter function, in that again it takes two parameters. One being a function that will go through all the items of a list, but in this case, in the filter case, we saw that it goes through, like we get a function that goes through each item in a list and checks for conditions, for certain conditions, in check if that item meets certain conditions. But now for the case of map, it goes through items in a list and does something to each item in that list. So to see this, like let's say let's just say map, let's just say first of all say map like this, and then we are going to let's define a function. So in this case, we are going to let's define a function that we know of here we have a nums variable that holds a list of numbers. Okay, what we are going to do is, let's say we want to square all the numbers in that list. So we can define a function that does that for us. So we could say def square num, and what it will do is it will take a number and then square that number. And to square a number, it just means multiplying a number by itself. So it will take a number, let's just say n, or n, a num, and return that number multiplied by itself. That means squared. That's all our square function is going to do. So that's the function. So to use the map method, which like I said, the way it works is it takes a list and does something to each item of that list. So in this case, we have decided, we know we have our list, which is this list of numbers on line 41. Now we want to go through this list and square all the numbers in that list. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll pass our square num function to map as the first parameter, and then the second parameter will be nums, which are like the numbers we want to square, like which is the list of numbers we want to square. So in this case, we will create another variable. We can call it squared nums. So you can call it squared nums. So again, after having our squared nums, so now we have our squared nums stored in this, which basically, like our map, we have this function that squares a number, that takes a number and squares it and returns the square of that number. That means it will do this to all the numbers inside the nums variable, and we have, when this is done, it is stored in squared nums. Now we cannot print this, like it's a map object. So to see these numbers, just like we saw for the case of filter, to see these numbers, what we will do is we say for num in squared nums, for num in squared nums, print num, and if we should run this, okay, we get after we get 3249, which is the square of 57. We get 100, which is the square of 10. We get 81, which is the square of 9. We get 16, which is the square of 4. We get 4, which is the square of 2. We get 1, which is the square of 1. We get 0, which is the square of 0. So that's what the map so that's the map function. Like, it takes a list and we define a function, and what happens is that function like determines what should happen to each item of the list. So that's map. We have looked at filter and map. They works in similar ways, one checking for certain conditions in a list, and the other just doing something to every item in a list. So there are so many built-in functions we can use with Python, with list. We are not going to look at all of them. We have just looked at these few, but lists are a very important data type, and understanding them is important. So you can check for the different, like let's say nums. If you do nums and you do square, you see you have other built-in functions that we have not looked at. We looked at append, at least. We have clear, copy, count, extend, index, insert. So these are all functions and attributes of list. You can try to do work with them and see how they work. Even the ones we have mentioned, there are more ways to use them that we have not touched, like slicing. There are ways of slicing from the end backward. There are many things, but we just touch them just so at least you have an idea, and then with more practice you get to be comfortable using them in diverse ways. So thank you.